And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you, Aquaba, and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Roster Report here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, here on livinginblack.com. My name is Keita Wadu, aka the Conscious Roster. Weekday mornings, you and I get together live. We come at you from 9 a.m. Pacific time. That's 12 noon Eastern time, 5 p.m. GMT, and 8 p.m. East Africa time. We get together with you, and we deal with culture, consciousness, historical perspectives. We deal with entertainment, economics, education, health, labor, law, politics, religion, family, conflict, future studies, all areas of human interactivity and development. Today's date is Tuesday. It is the 10th day of February 2026 in the Gregorian calendar, the Western calendar. This corresponds to the year 6266 in the calendar of ancient Kemet, to which we've realigned our cultural clock. Welcome to the 7th millennium. You have found your family. You have found your family in a peaceful place here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Hey, we got a good show for you today. I hope you do enjoy it. We are continuing this series of explorations into the history of the Conscious Rasta Report. To the best of my abilities, and I know I won't be able to do it all because I'm actually writing another book, but to the best of my abilities, we're going to step you from the oldest until the most recent of the Conscious Rasta Reports. We're still in 1998 at this point. So we've got a long way to catch up, no doubt. But we're doing 2 books per day, 5 days a week. So that's a total of 10 books each week for 2 months. 10 books a week for 2 months equates to 43 books, 45 books. And then at a certain point, I'm going to kind of jump and catch in the most recent one. So here's what you and I have on the table today. This is for African History Broadcast. This is number 7. The Technology of Control and Conspiracies and High Crimes. Today, we step back 30 years in time and examine my predictions for today's technology future. And, quote, surviving the future we feared. The book examined emerging technologies as tools for surveillance, manipulation, and social engineering. In it, I warned African and diaspora communities of digital control mechanisms across media, data tracking, and infrastructure, using proactive strategies for technological sovereignty and resistance against elite dominance. Next up is the exciting book. I'm very excited always to talk about this book, Conspiracies and High Crimes. We invested major modern conspiracies involving secret societies and how COINTELPRO manipulated events against our group's self-interest. It analyzes hidden agents in health, assassinations, and social engineering, urging readers, especially our African community, global community, to recognize the threats, plan resistance, and protect self-interest through strategic counter-plotting. So those are the 2 books for today, and I've just realized I didn't pull the books off the shelf, but I got them right here. This is The Technology of Control and Conspiracies and High Crimes. Where is you is? They're over here. Conspiracies and High Crimes. I got that one. And Technology of Control. Bear with me. I'm a little bit of a mess sometimes, but we do the best we can with what we have to get more so that we can do even better. So I have in hand Conspiracy and High Crimes, and where is the Technology of Control? Gotcha. Here we are. Bear with me, y'all. That was well worth the wait. First up, the technology of control. And that is surviving the future that we feared. A very, very serious book there. And the other book I have in hand is Conspiracies and High Crimes. You see me go into this book more and more frequently. So you can assume by that this is, for me at least, a very important book. I'm going to read one more paragraph. I stand before my community as a prolific conspiracy research author and scientific futurist of proud African heritage, authoring now my 62nd published book, challenging mainstream narratives on demographics, health epidemics, COVID-19, fertility crises, mind control, global economic warfare, and Pan-African empowerment. My Conscious Roster Report series fearlessly exposed hidden agendas from environmental toxins to disease surges, urging self-determination through nutrition, mastering technology, and strategic nation building. So that's what I have been about. That's what the Conscious Roster Report is about. So let's go into it today. Let me just clear my throat. And say greetings to my family. For Africa One is in the house. She says Hotep, Brother Keaty, and global LIB family. And Shabaka is in the house. Greetings, Baba, and LIB family. It is an amazing day and a blessing to be here with you all. And I did send your books out yesterday, Brother Shabaka. And for Africa One, I got your note. You received the book, the Conscious Roots. And it is a pleasure to have that in your hands. Brother Shabaka, you got Conscious Roots. It's on its way. Maybe there. Well, it should be there on Friday. As well as you got two more books. I dropped them in the postal mail. The one coming on Friday is going to be coming from the printer. The one's coming, I think they also coming on Friday, will be sent from my catalog over here. So that's what we're doing. That's what we got. We're saying greetings to our family. And I'm also going to just double check, make sure my YouTube family doesn't feel like you are getting left behind. We're doing the best we can to do the best we can to do even better, even better. So on that note, let's get this party started. Also, right at the beginning of the program, if you could, please, let me get you all to hit the like button so we can have a good idea of who we are, what we are doing, and who we are doing it with. I have a good audience today, good size audience. Great to have you with us. Technology of control. Now, where are we at? I'm looking at me over here, and that was a minute ago, but I have updated here. So let me get up to par. Here's what I'm going to say. This is from the back cover of this book, The Technology of Control. It's been over 25 years since the first publication of The Technology of Control. Here we go. It has been out of print for more than a decade. Initially, I was reluctant to reprint it in recent years, as I have many of my extensive catalogs of books from that era. Now, bear with me, skipping these ads. Okay. My thought was that it might seem hopelessly obsolete. Yet there was always a nagging imperative to bring my vast catalog out of books out and back into access for this and future generations. According to a vast accumulation of disclosures culled from newspaper articles, technical journals, government leaks, military hardware, advertisements, essays obtained from the internet, so-called information superhighway. That was what it was being called 30 years ago. And much work shared among fellow researchers, we can expect an intense development of high and low technologies as instruments of subversion, control, or destruction. These only serve to further fuel fears and anxieties. It has long been the tradition of Western, quote, civilization, as it slashed and burned its way through the foundations of indigenous cultures around the globe, to utilize the latest technological innovations toward destructive and coercive aims. Tools and amusements from more peaceful cultures, such as gunpowder and the, quote, firing stick, have traditionally served northern barbarians as instruments for subordination, quote, technology of control. So that's how I describe it on the back cover. And let's start going through some of these chapters. First, I begin on that very theme. Well, let's begin with the beginning of the book. This is chapter 1 is called The Age of Chaos. I begin with this quote from, who's this quote from? From Weapons of Mass Protection, Non-Lethality, Information Warfare, and Air Power in the Age of Chaos, written by Chris Morris, Janet Morris, and Thomas Baines, retrieved from the Air Chronicles internet site of the U.S. Air Force University. Here's what they said, quote, "The greatest threat to the international rule of law in modern memory may be the spread of chaotic destabilization. As in the mathematical model of chaos theory, the number of discrete destabilizing events, non-destructive to the status quo, when taken singly, may mount until their frequency causes a catastrophic shift in the nature of things. In this case, the balance of power in the world." And that catastrophic shift in balance of power is happening today. And it is the balance of power away from the United States as the main lasting superpower. It's now United States and the NATO bloc versus the BRICS bloc. And because of the actions of Donald Trump, the United States is increasingly isolating itself from the NATO bloc. The world is changing very rapidly. This is what we were looking at when the book first came out. The book first came out in 1997. And I do open with quote from me. "A menacing techno scourge rises like an insatiable beast from within our midst. Unless checked, eventually everyone who isn't directly in on the plot will become victim to the monster. Are we living in the future that we have long feared?" Let's go into it. The age of chaos. It is evident. The evidence is clear all around us. Many of us living in urban and suburban environments have a sense of acute paranoia that haunts us like some sort of supernatural figure. We're tethered to the umbilical cord of electronic media, which many of us have become convinced is being manipulated by a sinister force that ultimately only wishes us all ill intention. We tune in daily to electronic media like junkies, scavenging for multiple fixes of one, terror as entertainment through film and television; two, terror as inducement delivered through screaming and inducements to consume the latest product, which will ease our suppressed desires; and three, terror as confirmation of and justification for our gross anxiety through the news. Yes, this is the age of chaos. But from whence did this madness emerge? And will it ever come to an end? A revealing description of this era appeared in a document retrieved from the internet site of the U.S. Air Force University. It noted the spread of destabilization around the globe as part of a post-Cold War social evolution. And it read, now it'll probably overlap a little bit with what I just shared. An unforeseeable consequence of the breakdown of the bipolar world has been to remove war from the purview of the dueling superpowers and to return it to the people. Transnational and subnational groups, rogue states, and breakaway republics, civil warmongers, and modern and tin-horn dictators, ethnic purists, and religious fundamentalists all see the inchoate environment of the post-Cold War world as an opportunity to seize or increase power. The result is an environment of spreading destabilization that can be characterized as an age of chaos. The article, entitled Weapons of Mass Protection, Non-Lethality, Information Warfare, and Air Power in the Age of Chaos, went on to point out that the threat which uncontrolled destabilization could ultimately pose to the dominant powers. Quote, the greatest threat to the international rule of law in modern memory may be the spread of chaotic destabilization throughout the developing world. Little could they have predicted at that time, make America great again. The single greatest destabilizing event in the world today, and also the event that is posing the greatest threat to the rule of international law. I continue. Unable to see these disparate threats as part of a single class of threat with effects greater than the sum of its parts, the United States and the international community failed to act decisively. As in the mathematical model of chaos theory, the number of discrete destabilizing events, non-destructive to the status quo when taken singly, they mount until their frequency causes a catastrophic shift in the nature of things. In this case, the balance of power in the world. I write, as I have so often pointed out in the Conscious Roster report, as we began to understand how the Western security establishments have vowed that management of such, quote, chaotic destabilization throughout the developing world, unquote, is a top priority, we eventually see the same methodologies used to contain such chaos ultimately similarly target domestic dissent. Thus, the tool of assassination, long a sanction reserved for foreign agents, foreign targets, quote, came home to roost, unquote, with the high-profile murders of American-born progressive leaders such as the Kennedy brothers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and an estimated 26 members of the Black Panther Party, most likely all at the hands of American-born assassins. A menacing techno-scourge rises like an insatiable beast from within our midst. As the decades pass, its domestic targets are becoming more indiscriminate. Unless checked, eventually everyone who is not directly in on the plot will become a victim of the monster. We go on to talk about technology in the devil's service. This is a short paragraph. This is important too. It's long been the tradition of Western, quote, civilization, as it slashed and burned its way through the foundations of indigenous cultures around the globe, to utilize the latest technological innovations toward destructive and coercive aims. Thus, despite the Confucian development of gunpowder as largely a method of amusement and the Moorish achievement of the firing stick, it was in acquiring these technical achievements that those from the hills and caves of Europe ultimately modified them to ruthless efficiency. Tools and amusements from more peaceful cultures would ultimately serve the northern barbarian tribes as instruments for subordination technology of control. History has clearly illustrated that the brutal lethality of the sword, gun, bomb, and missile, all non-European cultures' inventions, we must make that point, have escalated to devastating efficiency as European nations, along with their cantankerous colonial progeny, hacked their way around the globe. The merciless white conqueror has always taken great pride in his capability for mechanized destruction. That mayhem ultimately stands as simply an effective methodology for usurping the will of humans. The various manifestations of these destructive intentions have continued evolving increasingly faster. We now stand 80 years after the completion of the first great European war, billed as, quote, the war to end all wars, unquote. It was believed at the time that the achievement of such military techniques as the machine gun and mobile artillery would attach such a cruel cost to armed conflict that more noble ideals would prevail, and such barbaric conflict would be deemed as too costly. Yet, with 80 years of hindsight, we face the terrible consequences that the process of patenting mass killing has only escalated. In the case of empires such as that of the former Soviet Union, and increasingly among those led by the former glorious United States, the pursuit of this technical supremacy, bankrupted the populaces. The Soviet socialist orbit has since collapsed upon itself and retreated into becoming a historical burnout. Not fit to be pitied, this catastrophe was ultimately brought upon themselves for seriously engaging the capitalist West in a tit-for-tat escalation of high-tech military lunacy. Such a level of disgrace has been reached that today the population of Russia is in a seemingly irreversible decline, a combination of a lack of procreative will and the unattractiveness of the Russian life for would-be immigrants. America will eventually suffer a different yet likewise undesirable fate. Already we can see indications of insurmountable domestic trends, poverty, disparity, widespread criminality, lack of national identity, compulsivity, and lack of moral restraint, which are slowly encroaching on the, quote, American dream, unquote, for large segments of the populace, largely due to a lack of vision on the part of its leadership. This country most definitely is firmly headed down the slimy gradient of social decay. This can be expected to result in ethnic conflict, increased deviant indulgences, widespread greed and avarice due to imminent demographic changes. A further consequence is that the mass of the population will increasingly reflect the face of that which is now regarded as the largely degraded, downtrodden underclass. I'm not complaining about such a transition. That's where I'm from, and whom I'm bound to those at the bottom. Rather than demonstrate the foresight or benevolent nature to back away from the abyss of wholesale suppression of human potential, the leaders of this country have committed themselves, and the mass of us along with them, to the continued evolution of the technology of control. As long as this pursuit is undertaken, we should only expect further social chaos and ill sentiment. Why? Because such destructive intent conflicts with nature, the only legitimate guide to us all. As well, repression conflicts with our innermost spiritual destiny. Yes, it is tough to strive for spiritual perfection while cradling an assault rifle. Only necessary because the other guy isn't pursuing a similarly enlightened future. That takes us to chapter 3. And at a certain point, I'm going to kind of speed it up because this extended essay is only pointing out what has become very obvious in our lives and in the world. I would love to hear your comments, to hear what you have to say about what we are talking about today. We are talking from the book, The Technology of Control. And if you want to get this book, I'm going to put this one up into our chat here. Let me put up the title first. And this is entitled Surviving the Future That We Feared. Copy. I'm going to paste this on YouTube along with the link. And the link is here. Copy that and paste this one here too. Bear with me, it's worth waiting for. And then copy all of that and paste it up for our Rumble family. The Technology of Control. And you can see I've been updating my website, Conscious Rasta Press. So if you click on that link, just click on the link, you'll see the book come up and the cover of the book. Again, this book was re-released later, and I'm very, very proud of what I did. So let's keep going. The Deadly Science, Progress of Science. Let me just a couple little introductory ideas. But this, skipping over it, we're realizing, one, the books are getting more complicated. Every day they're going to get more complicated and longer. And so I'm just going to give you highlights from this. This begins the chapter, The Deadly Progress of Science, with this quote: "We need a program of psychosurgery for political control of our society. The purpose is physical control of the mind. Everybody who deviates from the given norm can be surgically mutilated. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electronically control the brain. Someday armies and generals will be controlled by electronic stimulation of the brain." And that is from Dr. Dr. Jose Delgado, quoted in the U.S. Congressional Record, number 26, February 1974. Now look that up. Jose Delgado, U.S. Congressional Record, February 26, 1974. I want you to confirm that this document still does exist. Let me just read 2 paragraphs and then I'm going to skip forward. According to a vast accumulation of disclosures culled from newspaper articles, technical journals, government leaks, military hardware, and advertisements, essays obtained from the internet, and much shared work of fellow researchers, we can examine the development of high and low technologies as instruments for subversion, control, or destruction. Some of the technology described in this edition of the Conscious Rasta Report remains in different stages of secretive classification. Yet most of the methodologies applied towards suppressing personal inclination remain fairly mundane and blindingly obvious. As such, we must acknowledge the devastating effect of low technology instruments such as the refrigerator, the main route by which most Americans will bring about their physical limitation or meet an early demise, and the damned television. The controlling influence of television is so profound that great volumes of text have already been devoted to its corrupting power. Later in this report, I'll forward a radical theory about television as a vehicle for further suppression of the masses. And I just reminded myself, the chapter is entitled, Is Your Television Watching You, Watching It? Actually, the chapter is called A Spy Among Us. Is your television watching you, watching it? And guess what? Just last week, with the new LED televisions that are out, I had to go through and disconnect my televisions over here. I had to disconnect one I have in my room and one we have in the main room where we watch sports on. Is your TV watching you, watching it? Yes. It's creating a feedback loop, and I dare not imagine what it is gathering. But your TV is listening to you, and it is watching you. And that's something we better take serious. I'm going to go forward. I frequently caution my audiences not to get too caught up in quote, conspiracy theory hysteria about microchip implants, brainwave modulators, and extraterrestrial gadgetry. I attribute excess paranoia over such possibilities as too much faith in what Naeem Akbar terms, quote, the myth of the super white boy conspiracy. Although I will say, now with AI working in it as well, it's getting worse and we're all in trouble. I'm going to go to chapter 3, Star Wars Death Rays and Laser Beams. From earliest childhood, most can recall countless television and movie fantasies of futuristic battles with death rays, laser guns, particle beams, and other such directed energy weapons. Numerous cinematic images filled our imaginations of a future when today's conventional weapons would be replaced by devices that could shoot explosively hot light beams, exploding armor, and concrete capable of incinerating a target instantly. How many of us couldn't wait until such weapons became a reality and that somehow we would come into their possession? Let's skip forward. We're going to, in the following decades, lasers have been developed for numerous uses, ranging from largely innocuous applications inside compact disc players and microscopes to nuclear-powered particle beam weaponry. Much of this destructive intent has come to light due to Ronald Reagan's nightmare vision of the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program. Imagine airborne anti-missile and anti-tank laser weapons capable of being deployed on fighter aircraft or helicopters, or perhaps space-based laser platforms that can direct accurate laser fire at ground targets, generating at point of impact as much as 36,000 degrees centigrade of destructive energy. What would you think about the possibility of handheld laser guns that kill or maim silently, or maybe even gigantic multi-billion-dollar lasers the size of a football field, capable of reaching temperatures of 400 million degrees, 5 times the temperature of the sun? Over the past few years, I've understood that the laser weapons I've just described either exist or are on the U.S. military planners' drawing boards. In fact, a September 1994 flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery carried a $25 million laser into orbit that could generate a directed energy beam that, quote, bounced back from clouds, atmospheric particles, and the planet's surface, unquote. That laser beams appear to be a good bet to replace guns, bombs, missiles, and nuclear weapons in the coming century. A first cousin, the particle beam or directed energy weapon, may soon join it. News releases have documented how high temperature weapons research and development laboratories, such as Lawrence Livermore, Hughes Aircraft, and Rockwell, to name a few, compete for multi-billion-dollar Department of Defense contracts to design, construct, test, and deploy the next generation of directed energy weapons with which the military intends to disable hostile satellites, knock down missiles, zap battlefields, and incinerate human beings. I'm going to go forward. This has been deployed. We can now see the deployment of airborne particle beam weapons, directed energy weapons. Next, I'm going to a chapter called Coercive Applications for Microwave Technology. I begin with this quote from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy itself could become the captive of a scientific technological elite. From Dwight D. Eisenhower, cited in an article in Microwave Harassment and Mind Control Experimentation, written by Julianne McKinney, 1993. Numerous news accounts describe microwave instruments designed to shut down cars' electronic auto ignition systems, manufactured after 1987, engaging police in a high-speed pursuit. This type of technology reportedly includes one already tested by the U.S. military, which can disable a car's electronic ignition system from a space-based satellite. Published accounts have documented different stages of this technological innovation, including the deployment of dozens of global positioning system satellites, GPS satellites, the installation into all new automobiles of a, quote, black box, which contains a uniquely identifiable radio transmitter that will work with GPS. Similar transceivers are used in police cars to locate officers in trouble and to more quickly dispatch available patrol cars, and electronic monitoring devices that can be inserted in fleeing cars so police can track them without chases. It's happening. In fact, you and I can get them now for our car. Microwaves are used in state-of-the-art communication technology, such as cellular phones, beepers, surveillance equipment, etc. In addition, microwave technology is believed capable of implanting mental suggestion, a frightening mind control application that appears to have been conceived and developed as part of the national security establishment, the existence of which is attested to in a 1993 publication entitled Microwave Harassment and Mind Control Experimentation by a group calling itself the Association of National Security Alumni. The report, from what might be considered credible sources, laid out several scenarios wherein national security interests were currently pursuing the use of microwave technology for subversive purposes. Reading from the report, indeed, directed energy technologies appear to have evolved at such a rapid rate that they have now become promoted as the final solution to crime. Preliminarily, at a classified conference sponsored by the Los Alamos National Laboratory and supported by the American Defense Preparedness Association. Clearly, given this conference, data concerning the efficacy of acoustical, high-powered microwave laser, ELF and RF weapons, and, quote, psychotronic, unquote, systems is sufficient to allow for their now being promoted as tools for law enforcement. What is noteworthy in this sudden flurry of activity that no one has bothered to ask the following very basic questions. Where is the test data being obtained? What so far has prevented this government and its contractors from testing these technologies on U.S. citizens under involuntary circumstances? I write, the report described 5 specific areas where mind control experimentation was being pursued and reported the cases of 25 individuals whose stories seem to confirm such nefarious manipulation. This encompassed the cutting-edge behavior modification sciences of experimental drugs, induced auditory input, vicious overt harassment, psychiatric discrediting, and an extremely painful array of externally induced systems, microwave torture. As part of urban areas, this is scary. As part of urban areas, whole neighborhoods are surrounded by mysterious blue towers with sophisticated microwave arrays. While it could very well be that these are innocuous communication relays, published reports intimate that the blue towers are thought to be capable of, quote, causing extreme mental disturbance, unquote, and triggering schizophrenic reactions by transmitting extremely low frequency microwaves, ELF, which can impact human brainwave patterns. This would entail a sort of massive electronic fence around whole segments of a city. A publication entitled, quote, Microwave Towers, a Higher Form of Killing, unquote, circulated through Southern California in the early 1990s, laid out a credible account of the widespread deployment of microwave mind control technology. Written by a cryptic, quote, the Minister of Information, unquote, the document highlighted concern over the distribution of microwave communications towers, which had seemingly disproportionately been saturating certain urban areas. The report read in part, have you noticed these light blue colored towers mysteriously popping up in your neighborhood? These towers transmit ELF, extremely low frequency microwaves. With today's technology, microwave signals can be used to directly manipulate states of consciousness in humans, which means the microwaves, could produce schizophrenic-like behavior as well as amnesia. The unsuspecting victim or victims will receive sensations of, quote, hearing voices, unquote, which aren't a part of his or her thought processes. These towers pose a threat to you and your community, because when the DoD, Department of Defense, decides to use this electromagnetic technology on its citizens, they won't have any defense mechanism against this silent but deadly new form of killing, code-named Project Slammer. Project Slammer, operated by the CIA and the FBI Behavioral Modification Unit. That's the end of the citation from that document. So coincidentally, these towers seem to be concentrated around major freeway crossings, deep in freeway canyon passes, negating their efficiency as communication relays, and near public storage facilities. As an aside, speaking of the storage facilities, the, quote, Minister of Information raised the alarm over the Presidential Executive Order 11005, which provides for the government to take over railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities under the FEMA, Rex 84, Delta, and Bravo plans. According to this cryptic informant, these facilities are reputedly designed to house blacks in concentration camps in the event of widespread and sustained social disorder due to major civil unrest. It's currently being debated whether this is all true or not, but we should at least know about it. I'm being reminded myself today as I'm reading from this book just how profound the book is. I'm going to have to start to wrap it up. I'm going to go through the various chapters. We're talking about electronic communications surveillance, reading the introductory paragraph, the quote from J.A. Progler. Declassified documents, leaked information, insider sources, and public confession by former intelligence operatives have recently revealed that in the late 1980s, New Zealand joined the United States and other Western governments in a super secret global intelligence system to monitor most of the world's phone, fax, telex, and electronic mail communications. The American National Security Agency, which has spearheaded this program for years, has a business plan for global access to information in the 21st century, an all-seeing eye spy network for global order. But this is not the first conception of a surveillance-based world order. The thought of total control by total surveillance has enticed philosophers and demagogues in the West for centuries, from J.A. Progler, cited in The Panoptic Police State, An Emerging Global Order by L.A. Progler, published by Crescent Books. Going to the next chapter, I'm skipping through now. Ooh, this is good. Talked about different methods of electronic communication surveillance, such as debit cards. We must take a moment to analyze certain aspects of the proposed cashless society. I would say it's come to pass. I do not carry cash. Probably most of you do not either. The cashless society debit card system. This encompasses certain computer-based technologies, many of which have long been offered and in numerous cases have been deployed. The great fear is that such a financial debit system will ultimately mutate into a sinister means by which an increasingly oppressive state apparatus would maintain financial restrictions over unruly masses. And I talk about the evolution of prepaid phone cards to ranges from U.S. Postal Service to numerous communications, etc., etc. Skipping down, the L.A. Times featured an article in September 1994 that forecasted the greater dependence in the immediate future on multiple-use computerized cards that could replace cash. From the Reuters wire service said the following: the so-called smart card has already appeared in subways and at public telephones as the electronic purse. This allows customers to pay for rides and calls with a prepaid card that remembers each transaction. Ultimately, your doctor will be able to stick your card embedded with a microchip into a personal computer for your medical history, in the same way your smart card checkbook can be balanced to keep tabs on your spending at the end of the day. And it goes on. This is all come to pass. Let me skip forward. Next chapter talks about Big Brother's watching. And Big Brother is watching every chance he gets. He is watching you, he's surveying you, and he's keeping track of you. Space, underground, and sea surveillance, another chapter, a very important chapter. Big Brother watching during ever-increasing moments during our daily lives. Nearly all of us are under some manner of surveillance from government agencies and private interests. No matter how non-threatening our existence is, we are collectively being swept into a communications network that leaves us vulnerable to constant electronic monitoring. This overlapping surveillance network has us under watch in our homes, during our daily travels, workplaces, commerce, or recreational facilities. And then I go to talk about many of them, many of them. Video surveillance, electronic surveillance at work, etc. It goes on. This is a fascinating book. I hope you do agree. And I'm going to begin to wrap up today's conversation. I'm not today's conversation. I'm going to wrap up for this book. I do see Joshua K. Empower is in the house. Grand Rising, Brother Keaty. And he says, thank you for the information. Yeah, this is powerful. I'm going to encourage people to get the book. Every day I'm saying the same thing. Get the book. We're talking about the next chapter, a lower form of killing, which is a take on a higher form of killing we talked about in another earlier book of writing. And the LA Times reported in 1995 that the newly arriving Marines from Camp Pendleton, including a reserve warrant officer who was also a lieutenant with the LA County Sheriff's Department, tested a variety of experimental weapons on the Somali populace, including pepper-laced soap suds, sticky foam, bean bags, and rubber bullets. Of particular interest was the taffy glue foam, which had been developed in 1992 for use in subduing a prisoner disturbances. Now, this being tested in Mogadishu during George Bush's military forces committed to supposed humanitarian security mission. A number of U.S. forces forced a rapid disengagement when images of GI corpses being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu began showing up on the evening news. Well, in retaliation, they sent in the experimenters. They tested a variety of experimental weapons on the Somali populace, including pepper-laced soap suds, sticky foam, bean bags, and rubber bullets. Quote, this quoting from Marines Take a Tip from LA Riots by John Salazar, writing in the LA Times, February 25, 1995. U.S. forces tested sticky foam sprayed from handheld tanks, not unlike those seen in the movie Ghostbusters. Turn on a nozzle, and a 1-inch stream of foam squirts forth to a range of perhaps 30 feet. Upon contact with the air, the foam expands and congeals into a taffy-like glue that can hold someone fast to the ground for hours. It can take days to pull from the skin. And at close quarters, you can still kill somebody with this stuff. That made these Marines feel better. Rumors have persisted and are elaborated upon in the documentary video, The Panama Deception, that the U.S. had deployed experimental weapons resembling particle beams during Bush's earlier excursion into Panama, supposedly in pursuit of a, quote, pineapple face, unquote, alleged drug-dealing dictator named Manuel Noriega. The Department of Defense admitted that sonic weaponry was used to dislodge the reluctant Noriega from the grounds of a Catholic institute where he had sought sanctuary. And the book, we got through about half of it, even though I skipped over much of that. More chapter titles: Military Hardware Comes Home to Roost, and Non-Lethal Weaponry is chapter title. This is a couple more chapter titles, and then I'm going to go to the next book. Information Warfare. Is somebody playing tricks on my mind? This is interesting. This quote here from Aldous Huxley. Today, the art of mind control is in process of becoming a science. The practitioners of the science know what they are doing and why. They are guided in their work by theories and hypotheses solidly established on a massive foundation of experimental evidence. Thanks to the new insights and the new techniques being made by these insights, the nightmare that was all but realized in Hitler's totalitarian system may soon be completely realizable. From Aldous Huxley. And on that note, I do talk about Liberation Radio. This is where LIB Radio emerged from. Again, LIB Radio was launched in 2003, but this chapter was written in 1997. Liberation Radio, a very good chapter. It talks about low power FM radio, and that's where we started off. We started off as an LP FM station in Southern California. So this is useful. This is useful. I hope you found the technology of control to be exciting. And again, the book is nearly 30 years old. It is 30 years old. Next, we're going to go into Conspiracies and High Crimes, a book that we have brought up numerous times here on LIB Radio. Conspiracy in law, agreement between persons to do something illegal or criminal. In this offense, the mere agreement of the conspirators is punishable by legal authority, even though they may not have taken any action to complete the crime. In most cases of conspiracy, however, such acts are performed. And we begin, this book is so good. I deal with chapter 1, conspiracy theories. And then also, before going then, I do give you a listing of all of my books that were published up to the time of this one. So at this particular point, by the time I get to this book, the one that came out is AIDS, the Establishment Confesses It's a Hoax, that's since changed to The Great AIDS Deception. And all of the books I had published up to then, Busted, Missing Assets, The Technology of Control, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the beginning of the book. Are blacks vulnerable to propaganda? This is really insulting. This appeared in the LA Times, written by John L. Mitchell and Sam Fullwood, collaborated on the 1996 article, October 22nd, entitled History Fuels Outrage Over Crack Allegations. A vulnerability to conspiracy theories? Black communities, freighted with a history of oppression, reeling from high rates of poverty and facing unprecedented cutbacks in federal social programs, are particularly vulnerable to conspiracy theories, scholars say. The widespread acceptance of the allegation that the government helped steer crack to South Central Los Angeles, quote, says something about the isolation and lack of inclusion that African Americans experience in this society, said Florence Bonner, chairwoman of the sociology department at Howard, I didn't say how white, I said Howard University in Washington, D.C. There's a feeling of isolation and disassociation from those very institutions that are there to support and involve us. I'm not going to read any more from her. She's a little bit off. But then I do talk about conspiracy theories, such as, despite such insult, their article goes on to acknowledge a credible history of anti-black actions by government agencies, including U.S. Department of Health's notorious Tuskegee syphilis study, widespread Jim Crow statutes, government-sponsored human experimentation, the FBI's illegal COINTELPRO program, which is a whole chapter in this book, the leniency allowed the Korean murderer of Latasha Hargans, the videotaped lynching of Rodney King, and an uninterrupted history of racial police abuse. But she missed a bunch of stuff. Any student of U.S. history can easily confirm that that there is mounds of credible data to back up these specific racist episodes. Must be also noted that the aforementioned list is but a fraction of provable misbehavior on the part of government agencies toward Native Americans, blacks, and Hispanics, along with poverty-prone whites, recent immigrants, and other undesirable social groups. We can see all of this coming to pass today. This history includes accounts of sabotage in the black community using drugs, alcohol, and weapons, which dates back as far as a relationship between the World War era spy agency, the U.S. Office of Strategic Studies, and Sicilian mafia partisans. There is also persistent stories from the Vietnam War that the DoD officials and lower-ranking officers shipped quantities of heroin into the U.S. military bases in the bodies, cavities of dead GIs, red tagging of the remains indicating which corpses contained the dope. The question is, could the CIA have been involved in the saturation of the black community with drugs? The answer could be absolutely consistent with this country's racist and genocidal history. So the first conspiracy, there are 6 specific conspiracies that I list in this book. Conspiracies and High Crimes. COINTELPRO then and now. Quote from Thomas Jefferson: single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers too often proves a deliberate, systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. Now, how ironic that quote about reducing us to slavery by Thomas Jefferson, who himself enslaved human beings. The book is titled Conspiracies and High Crimes. Let me just real quickly, I want to put this up for you, those of you who are motivated, sufficiently motivated to want to get this book. And Conspiracies and High Crimes. Copy that and paste it over here on YouTube. And along with the link, and bear with me, it's worth waiting for. I accidentally hit the wrong button. Come on, act right. Here we go. Copy and paste it here. And then copy all of that and put that up for our Rumble family. That link to get this book is now up on your YouTube link. And here it is now up on Rumble. I do see a couple of messages come in. For Africa One, brother, I am working on peace, balance, and mindfulness. Feeling stressed already. Sorry, I'll have to skip this book. You've been a great supporter. I'm not going to pressure you. And we should all be working on peace, balance, and mindfulness. In my opinion, I do think that this does include me knowing what is ahead. This book goes deep, deep, deep into, I added a chapter to it from its original. No, I didn't add. It was in here already. It's just forgot to switch books. This book entitled Conspiracies and High Crimes. First, it deals with COINTELPRO and the techniques that were used, many of which were developed during the Mau Mau uprising, which you do have that book, COINTELPRO Then and Now. And I write, would an illegal government counterintelligence program from the 1940s through the 1970s still be so relevant today? Or why should that be relevant today? Those of us who are not aware of the mistakes of history are thereby doomed to repeat the worst of that history. During the 20th century, we have numerous models of brutal state repression of internal political dissent. Hitler's Nazi regime was noted for its concentration camps throughout Germany and Eastern Europe. Stalin's gulags accomplished the exact same thing in the Soviet Union. During the Mau Mau conflict, the British colonials in Kenya herded tens of thousands of Africans into barbed wire, quote, homelands. U.S. government established the Murderous Phoenix program during its Vietnam occupation. To this day, the Western nations condemn China for its policies, which imprison political dissenters. Using these various repressive episodes as an example, we can now begin to examine how the United States has constructed similar domestic programs to crush those who would seek to upset the national status quo. No small number of American citizens have dissented when they've determined that the conditions under which they have been living are unacceptable. During the COINTELPRO programs of just the 60s and 70s, hundreds were murdered and assassinated, thousands were jailed through government malfeasance, and tens of thousands of lives were interrupted through clandestine programs aimed at suppressing political dissidents. Now we go through, and I spent a lot of time talking about the roots of FBI counterintelligence. They actually started with the King family. And I have numerous books here. We talk about the Judas Factor, the plot to kill Malcolm X. I reference the orders to kill, the truth behind the murder of Martin King by William F. Cooper, and War at Home, covert action against U.S. activists and what we can do about it by Brian Glick. The FBI's Secret War on Black America by Kenneth O'Reilly, and Malcolm X, the FBI File by Claiborne Carson from Carroll and Graph Publishers, 1991. So I pulled from all of these in creating this chapter. And let me tell you, that took a long time. We go into subchapter. Oh, this is very good. By the mid-1920s, Gay Edgar Hoover's machine had emerged upon repressive operations specifically targeting blacks. The first of Hoover's counterintelligence actions were directed against Marcus Garvey and the rapidly growing black nationalism movement. Quote, perhaps the only full-blown effort at selective political repression engaged in by the Bureau was the initiating of a campaign against Marcus Garvey, which resulted in his frame-up on false charges and ultimately, in 1927, his deportation as an undesirable alien, a strategy which severely diminished the potential of the then vibrant Universal Negro Improvement Association. That quote from Churchill and Vanderwall's book, page 27. Other volumes, in particular Tony Martin's Race First, Majority Press, document significant detail the U.S. government's unprincipled attack on the Garvey movement. In the decades that have followed, other nationalist leaders have been similarly targeted, including, but not limited to, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Robert F. Williams, Martin Luther King Jr., Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, and others. Additionally, specific targeting revolutionary youth movements, COINTEL operations harassed leaders of the Black Panther Party, BPP, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, United Slaves, and numerous other youth groups, including urban street organizations, so-called gangs. The U.S. secret moves on black youth. And we have that quote. You've heard it a number of times. From the FBI, the special agent in charge of the San Francisco office of the FBI wrote this, quote, the Negro wants and needs something to be proud of. The Negro youth and moderate must be made to understand that if they succumb to revolutionary teaching, they will be dead Negroes or dead revolutionaries. Is it not better to be a sports hero, a well-paid professional athlete or an entertainer, a regularly paid white-collar or blue-collar worker, a peaceful human being with a family, or a person who is at least being accepted, than a Negro who may have gotten even with the establishment by burning it down, but who, along with this, burned down his own home and gained for him and all his people the hatred and distress of the whites for years to come. So it goes on. We do cite numerous of the COINTELPRO documents that have been released across these many different sources I use. Quotes from the papers include, quote, to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. Point, to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Quote, to prevent violence on the part of black nationalist groups. Point, prevent militant black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to the community. And point, a final goal must be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black nationalist organizations, especially among youth. And we talk about these assassinations. During the course of operations against black revolutionary youth organizations, the FBI organized at least 4,000 black agent collaborators to infiltrate, gather surveillance upon, and disrupt progressive and militant groups. The agency's machinations led directly or indirectly to the murders of an estimated 26 Black Panther leaders, along with those of countless others. Those targeted for assassination, who actually lost their lives to government-instigated violence, included Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, leaders within the Chicago chapter, Alprentice Bungie Carter, Alprentice Bungie Carter, and John Huggins of the Los Angeles chapter, Fred Bennett and Jimmy Carr from the Bay Area chapter, Robert Weaver and Sammy Napier from New York, Black Panther Party Field Marshal George Jackson, and Sandra Lane Pratt, the wife of BPP Minister of Defense Geronimo Gijaga Pratt. Through numerous internal memos which followed these murders, the FBI gave themselves, quote, a good measure of credit, unquote, for these accomplishments. And that's from Church and Vanderwall's book, 1990, page 133. I'm going to skip forward. There are other investigations in the book. That's just a brief on COINTELPRO. The next one that we're taking on is, and we've referred to this numerous times, secret societies and ceremonial magic. This we cannot, we should not, we will refuse to deny this is real. And for Africa One, she says, this is not just a Western phenomena. I don't see Asia democratizing this. And you're making a good point. And she said, oh, and talking about she didn't want that book, she was referring to the technology of control. No problem, no problem at all. Each one feels what they know feels right. Now, let me see, is this, I posted this up a little bit earlier, but let me see. I'm going to post it up a second time because it appears that it didn't completely go through. So Conspiracies and High Crimes, there it is. This book now, you can have a link up to it as well. Secret Societies and Ceremonial Magic, Chapter 4. Quote from Israel Regardie writing in the Golden Dawn. And this is I incorporated this as a Cometian priest. I took this to heart. Not enough is it to be illuminated. The problem is not quite as simple as that. It is in vain that the wine of the gods is poured into broken bottles. Each part of the soul, each elemental aspect of the entire man must be strengthened and transmuted and brought into equilibrium and harmony with the others. Integration must be the rule of the initiate, not pathology. In such a vehicle, made consecrate and truly holy by this equilibrium, the higher genius may find a worthy and fit dwelling. This and this alone may ever constitute the true nature of initiation. Israel Regardie writing in the Golden Dawn. And we talk about the secret of all ages. You may recognize the names such as Freemasonry, Knights of Templar, Skull and Bones, Rosicrucians, Luciferianism, the Round Table Group, Illuminati, the Boule, numerous secret societies and Kabbalistic orders. Throughout history, there are many such examples of initiate societies that have bewildered the unknowing outsider as they captured the unwavering commitment of the initiated. Such is the stuff of some of the grandest conspiracy treatises of the past 2,500 years and more. Most of us have very little idea what is at the very existence of the teachings that bind men within these organizations to secrecy and to each other. And since people tend to fear that which with they are unfamiliar, we have by and large written these groups off throughout history as essentially evil and conspiratorial. Skipping down, we're talking about Manly Palmer Hall's phenomenal book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, within a chapter called Ceremonial Magic and Sorcery. In it, Hall was attempting to communicate the evolution of, quote, black magicians, white sorcerers, whose practices of invoking unseen forces had been the focus of no small number of secret orders throughout time. He wrote, and I quote, "Ceremonial magic is the ancient art of invoking and controlling spirits by scientific application of certain formula. A magician, enveloped in sanctified vestments and carrying a wand inscribed with hieroglyphic figures, could, by the power vested in certain words and symbols, control the invisible inhabitants of the elements and of the astral world. While the elaborate ceremonial magic of antiquity was not necessarily evil, there arose from its perversion several schools of sorcery or black magic." And I would suggest that amongst these schools of sorcery and black magic would be Kabbalism. I'm going to skip forward. I'm just going to quote Manly Palmer Hall. And my explanations are very important, but I'm going to focus on his words. You can get the book and you can hear what I have to say about what he just said. Egypt, he writes, a great center of learning and the birthplace of many arts and sciences, furnished an ideal environment for transcendental experimentation. Here, the black magicians of Atlantis, white sorcerers of the Mediterranean, continued to exercise their superhuman powers until they had completely undermined and corrupted the morals of the primitive mysteries. By establishing a sacerdotal caste, they usurped the position formerly occupied by the initiates, and seized the reins of spiritual government. Thus, black magic dictated the state religion and paralyzed the intellectual and spiritual activities of the individual by demanding his complete and unhesitating acquiescence in the dogma formulated by the priestcraft. The Pharaoh became a puppet in the hands of the Scarlet Council, a committee of arch sorcerers elevated to power by the priesthood. And I do take about 2 pages that just let you know what he was just saying, but I have to go forward. Thus, the individual who can master his or her obsession, this is me writing, and guide them toward higher order morality, is the one who can liberate themselves from the chains which bind the masses to ignorance and spiritual inactivity. Once again, quote from Manly Palmer Hall, "These theories as revealed by Manly Palmer Hall should not be taken lightly." He continues, "These sorcerers then began the systematic destruction of all keys to the ancient wisdom, so that none might have access to the knowledge necessary to reach adeptship without first becoming one of their order. They mutilated the rituals of the mysteries while professing to preserve them, so that even though the neophyte passed through the degrees, he could not secure the knowledge to which he was entitled. Idolatry was introduced by encouraging the worship of the images which in the beginning the wise had erected solely as symbols for study and meditation. False interpretations were given to the emblems and figures of the mysteries, and elaborate theologies were created to confuse the minds of their devotees. The masses, deprived of our birthright and groveling in ignorance, eventually became the abject slaves of the spiritual impostors. Superstition universally prevailed, and the black magicians, white sorcerers, completely dominated national affairs, with the result that humanity still suffers from the sophistries of the priestcrafts of Atlantis and Egypt. It goes on, fully convinced that their scriptures sanctioned it. Numerous medieval Kabbalists devoted their lives to the practice of ceremonial magic. The transcendentalism of the Kabbalists is founded upon the ancient and magical formula of King Solomon, who has long been considered by the Jews as the prince of ceremonial magicians. Among the Kabbalists of the Middle Ages were a great number of black magicians who strayed from the noble concepts of the Sefer Yetzirah and became enmeshed in demonism and witchcraft. They sought to substitute magic mirrors, consecrated daggers, and circles spread around points of coffin nails for the living of the virtuous life, which, without the assistance of complicated rituals or sub-mundane creatures, unfailingly brings man to the state of true individual completion. And bear with me here. Thus, Manly Palmer Hall makes it very perfectly clear that according to his research, it was a Kabbalistic order established within the Solomonic tradition that evolved through the Middle Ages to become the essential core of which today perpetrates the theft of the birthright of all mankind, that of unfettered pursuit of the greatest good. Skipping forward, this is what I found when given a book. I'm not going to tell that story of how I encountered this book. Someone gave it to me, traded it with me, and I was never regret having received this. But within minutes of having examined this 800-page book, here's what I found. I opened it up and it magically came right to me. I am Osiris, which is a Greek name for Osar. So the purified and justified man, his soul luminous and washed from sin in the immortal and uncreated light, united to Osar, and thereby justified, and the Son of God, purified by suffering, strengthened by opposition, regenerate through self-sacrifice. Such is the subject of the great Egyptian Kemetic ritual. And when I read that, it was like a bolt of lightning cutting through me. I'll remember the night I read that. I'll never forget that. And it changed me. And it goes on. I'm going to have to wrap this chapter up because there's several more chapters. Such is the stone of the philosophers, the quintessence, the summum bonum, true wisdom and perfect happiness. And I'm going to come out of this chapter. Ooh, this is so good. And it goes on and on and on. It talks about the tree of life. It talks about all of these things. And I actually got a copy of the book. And I went through the rituals. And I do not recommend anyone at all. If you're going to get the book, The Golden Dawn, do not engage in the rituals. It's a trap. It's a mental trap, and if you get trapped in that, you may find yourself becoming what many of us know as a Luciferian or Satan worshiper, I do suggest you don't want to follow Snoop Doggy Dogg down that trip. If you look, Snoop Doggy Dogg is very powerful. It's because of the pact. He sold his soul. And we don't want to ignore these things. It talks about the Nazi swastika, which the Africans knew as a symbol that they corrupted and turned to evil purposes. But this symbol had been constructed for meditation. The 17 magic squares of the Kabbalah, that many recognize as the Nazi emblem, is an ancient symbol being used as a magical talisman. The center square represents the sun, surrounded on four sides by the cardinal elements, each of which is complemented by 3 of the 12 houses of the zodiac. So central square, surrounded on the 4 sides by the 4 cardinal elements, each of those has 3 attached to it, becomes the swastika. And then I close the chapter with this: I further solemnly promise and swear that with the divine permission, I will from this day forward apply myself to the great work which is to purify and exalt my spiritual nature, that with the divine aid I may at length attain to be more than human, and thus gradually raise and unite myself to my higher and divine genius, and that in this event I will not abuse the great power entrusted to me. Chapter 5, Ebola virus or mycotoxin attack. Just a real quick quote to open up the chapter from the book by Pillar and Yamamoto in Gene Wars. They wrote, and I quote, an enzyme deficiency in southeastern Asian populations makes them susceptible to a poison to which Caucasoids are largely adapted. That from Swedish geneticist Carl Larsson wrote in 1970. So we're talking about, where did this Ebola thing come from? Is it a disease or is it a mycotoxin, a form of fungus? I do cite a lot of different resources for this research. It goes on and on and on. Leonard Cole, writing in Clouds of Secrecy, the Army's germ warfare tests over populated areas, wrote about how the U.S., after President Nixon announced the end of the United States offensive biological warfare program, shifted the very same research into other areas. Henceforth, biological warfare research would be labeled as research into, quote, infectious diseases, and would further be contracted out to non-governmental agencies. He wrote, and I quote, in 1968, when President Nixon announced the end of the United States offensive biological warfare program, a large facility was already under construction at Detroit to house medical research associated with biological warfare. The sprawling structure was completed in 1971 and became the home of the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRID. Please note that name. Look it up, USAMRID. You have to understand this is a deep, deep story. It's been documented in many places. I'll continue. It has become the principal location of the base for continued biological warfare research. Costing $18 million, the building sits on the edge of a complex of older facilities, some of which are still part of the biological warfare program. Others having been converted to cancer research facilities. Much of the U.S. government's involvement in cancer research is actually more involved in chemical biological warfare and toxin warfare. That's why I'm exposing in this chapter the existence of what you didn't know about toxin warfare. And toxin warfare is like blending chemicals and biologicals. In fact, I write about that, the basics of biochem warfare. As mentioned above, modern chemical biological warfare, CBW, has focused on the development of biological weapons, BW, biological toxin, TW, and chemical agents, CW. Within each of these three different categories of pathogenic substances, CBW researchers have collected, stored, analyzed, recombined, set up delivery systems for, and attempted to defend against a whole host of deadly substances. Each category of agents has its own set of handling criteria, from acquisition to delivery and defense. Biological agents are living germs, quote unquote, even though it's hard to see how a virus, which has no metabolism, can be described as, quote, living, which have been shown to cause injury to other living creatures, either human or animal. Chemical agents are manufactured inorganic compounds largely comprised of complex molecular combinations. Nerve agents are considered the deadliest of the chemical class. Toxin agents are chemicals that are manufactured by or are a byproduct of living organisms. And going forward, I'm going to focus in at a certain point on the Ebola and the existence of toxic agents. And we do talk about, quote unquote, virus weapons in the U.S. arsenal. While I have a fundamental reluctance to believe much of what we read about the role that viruses play in direct causal relationship to diseases, there is a significant body of published information on how viruses have been advanced as bioweapons. I encourage the reader to consider the following reports within the framework that viruses are dangerous and can cause a wide range of deadly diseases in humans, or that viruses are protein fragments too tiny to ever be properly called, quote, cellular material, but merely cellular debris, and thus are too weak to do more than just hang around. For 20 years, USAMRIID has had in its frozen storage a number of so-called hemorrhagic fevers. Among these are what are presumed to be some of the deadliest viruses known to mankind. While there is cause to question that viruses are, without exception, dangerous to humans, we will base much of our discussion regarding the military use of viruses upon acceptance of the hypothesis that viruses can indeed host pathological conditions in humans, certain of which are deadly. The hemorrhagic viruses, when the DoD acknowledges that it has possession of, include Ebola, Lassa fever, Marburg fever, green monkey disease, Junin, Machupo, and Congo Crimean hemorrhagic fever. In addition, USAMRIID has many other deadly viruses, including Rift Valley fever, West Nile encephalitis, Oropouche fever, and others. In her book, The Killing Winds, Jane McDermott writes about the suspect causative agent Ebola. Quote, like Lassa, Ebola came to the attention of the West suddenly as a result of two severe outbreaks that occurred between July and November of 1976 in the Sudan and Zaire. Scientists isolated the virus named after the Ebola River in Zaire after 284 people came down with the disease in the Sudan, and 151 died, and 318 got sick in Zaire, and 280 died. A second outbreak took place in the same area in 1979, but otherwise the Western world has seen little of the virus. With a 71% fatality rate, which is challenged in this chapter, Ebola is extraordinarily lethal, triggering hemorrhage on the 5th day and death by the 10th day. But like the AIDS virus, it seems to spread through direct contact with infected blood, which occurs in poor hospitals when needles are reused without adequate sterilization. And that's a bunch of crap. But I'm quoting other people. The virus will not grow easily in the lab, so little is known about it or possible cures. Now, I write about mycotoxin war. Listen, today approximately 50% of the research done at the United States, USAMRIID, diseases is being conducted on toxins, 50%, in contrast to what the name would imply, infectious diseases. U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Mycology is a branch of botany dealing with fungi. Fungus includes molds, various bacteria, and mushrooms. Moldy grain and spoiled bread have been shown throughout history to cause phenomenally large epidemic outbreaks, which have killed thousands of mostly poor who cannot afford to discard contaminated grain stores and moldy bread. From the book Yellow Rain, A Journey Through the Terror of Chemical Warfare by Sterling Seagrave, come the following insights. Quote, rampages of pestilence and black death beset the miserable souls of the Middle Ages so often that we have only the most confusing record of St. Vitus's dance, epilepsy, St. Anthony's fire, blindness, dementia, plague, and poisoning, from which to deduce the true causes of their mortal suffering. Yet the greatest cause, aside from contagious diseases spread by vermin, surprisingly, was bread. In the rye, the wheat, and the barley, the rice, the oats, the malt, and the hops, there grew such a curse of deadly fungus that it is a wonder anyone survived at all. More amazing to us, in an age when bread and other grain foods come prepackaged in sterile loaves, it is the fact that these horrible epidemics range from Hellenic Greece in 430 BC to as recently as the 1940s, when part of the population of a Soviet province was wiped out by the lethal toxins in poorly wintered grain. Ergot, spelled E-R-G-O-T, look that up, ergot, was only one of the fungal poisons or mycotoxins. It was, above all, a bleeding disease. Minutes after the poison grain was eaten, the victim began to burn in the mouth, throat, esophagus, and stomach, as the poison quickly went to work on the mucous membranes, causing surface hemorrhages. Then came a hemorrhagic rash on the skin of the chest, spreading within an hour to the abdomen, legs, arms, and face. The rapid onslaught of internal bleeding was accompanied by violent headaches, dizziness, vertigo, weakness, and fatigue. Fever, sweating, angina, neurological tremors, spasms, and then convulsions. The blood pressure fell, bleeding became heavy in the intestines and all the vital organs and glands, particularly in the adrenal and thyroid glands, gonads, uterus, and pleura. Suddenly the lungs gushed blood. Filling quickly with it, the heart began to fail as the bleeding spread to the liver, the kidneys, the central and autonomic nervous systems, the ganglia, and finally the brain. In agony, the terminal victim spewed blood from every body opening. In the few cases where people survived, there was blood seeping from the eyes and ears and all other orifices. So I write about the following the previous paragraphs and the spreading of the progress. It changes over the course of time. I'm saying these changes of how long it takes to spread is indicative of ongoing research, and they're changing the nature of it, the character of it. Yet, before we can establish connections between the mycotoxins and the 1994 outbreak in Zaire, we must examine the way in which CBW researchers have developed the use of toxin weapons. As mentioned before, 50% of the research going on at USAMRIID dealt with toxins. In general, this is reading from the book Gene Wars, Military Control of the New Genetic Technologies by Charles Pillar and Keith Yamamoto, comes the following briefing on toxins. In general, toxins are poisons produced by living organisms from shellfish to fungi. They occupy a middle ground between chemicals and organisms. The active ingredient in poison mushrooms is a toxin, botulinum toxin, a chief cause of food poisoning, botulism, is produced by a bacterium. Snake venom is also a toxin. Because many toxins have legitimate medical uses, their definition as a weapon is based on clear hostile intent. So we talk about numerous of these that have been developed, including the source from which they're extracted. They include aberin from a plant, aflatoxin from a fungus, algal toxin from algae, bactericotoxin from a frog, botulism from bacterium, coral toxins from corals, ricin from plants, saxitoxin from shellfish, sea wasp toxin from jellyfish, Staphylococcus enteroxin, a bacteria, tetanus toxin, bacterium, and trichothecene mycotoxin, T2 toxin from a fungus. Specifically, in looking at Ebola, the next chapter, virus outbreak or mycotoxin poisoning. I'm going to read through this real quickly, but this is my response and why I always claim that Ebola was a fake out. Among the above mentioned lists, it is T2 toxin or trichothecene mycotoxin that has come to my attention as a likely candidate for the true cause of the Ebola Zaire outbreak. Insofar as relative lethality of the various toxins mentioned above, T2 toxin is the least deadly, slightly more toxic than snake venom, but less deadly than the nerve gas sarin. There are disputed reports that the Soviet Union utilized T2 toxins in CBW attacks throughout Southwest Asia, Afghanistan, and Yemen. Many books give an account of the Cold War state of international affairs that brought about these accusations. Among the most widely recounted is the case of, quote, yellow rain, unquote, which was reported in Laos and Cambodia. A higher form of killing by Robert Harris and Jeremy Paxton gives us an account of what these compounds were suspected of causing. Quote, the multiplicity of symptoms described in these attacks with what the refugees called yellow rain disturbed the Pentagon. No known chemical weapon could produce a particular combination of symptoms which the victims reported. The powder seemed to have properties of several of the known chemical agents, burning like mustard, choking like phosgene, and killing as swiftly as nerve agent. But no previously known weapon was capable of producing the massive internal bleeding that which the refugees reported. Army scientists became convinced that the Soviet Union had developed an entirely new weapon. Looking back at the casualty records of the Yemen Civil War, they discovered that there had been reports of acute hemorrhaging, although at the time few had thought the symptom of great significance. Various theories were put to account for the properties of the supposed new weapon. Some believed that the Russians had developed what they called a double punch weapon, a cocktail of two different gases. Other research suggested that they were supplying their Vietnamese allies with an entirely new weapon derived from poisonous coral or snake venom. Going in the background, further from the same book. In particular, the biologists concentrated on the poison types trichothecenes or T2 toxins. T2 had been known about for years. Indeed, the Americans' suspicions were accentuated when it was realized that much of the research on the toxin had been carried out in the Soviet Union. Russian scientists had been studying T2 seriously during the 1930s, for by then fungal growths on poorly stored grain had killed thousands of Soviet citizens. So problematical did the poisoning appear to be that such much scientific effort had been devoted to manufacturing the toxin in laboratories. Nearly half the openly published articles on T2 dealt with methods of production. Stories of near epidemics caused when infected food had been eaten described almost identical symptoms to those reported from Laos, Cambodia, and most recently Afghanistan. Published Russian accounts spoke of victims suffering a burning feeling in the mouth and stomach, followed by headaches, dizziness, and convulsions, before they finally began to spew blood from every orifice. Given the results of the American laboratory analysis, the apparent similarity of symptoms, and the Soviet ability to produce T2 on a laboratory bench, the State Department concluded that T2 had now probably become the latest Soviet weapon. If so, it was the first new germ weapon in nearly 20 years. Now, it goes on, and I describe these symptoms more and more, but you do want to finish this chapter. The last point I'll make about this chapter is that I was being published by the Final Call newspaper for my articles on bioweapon research. I sent this one. I had a friend. She was a journalist with them. I highly respect her. But I sent this to her because she requested something from me on Ebola. When I sent it to her, little did I know that they would forward it to the U.S. National Security Establishment, and specifically National Health Association, for their commentary. I didn't appreciate that at all, and immediately severed my ties with the Nation of Islam and the Final Call newspaper. Here's what I conclude further. Even then, I could go much further. Detail of my investigations regarding the links between mycotoxins, ethno-specific CBW agents, and how such U.S. military research has evolved. I want to bring all this to some sort of conclusion. Further, I want to demonstrate how an examination of a variety of media reports has given me sufficient justification to put forward the hypothesis that, quote, the Ebola virus outbreaks are most likely a ruse, which is really disguising CBW attacks on this Central African nation. The principal weapon is a mycotoxin made from an altered trichothecene bacterium recombination. The principal method of, quote, infection is through donated medical supplies utilized by the hospitals where it's at, or are at the source of all of the outbreaks. And I do list those hospitals, etc., earlier in the report. And the attacks were hinted at within media reports. And I'm going to close the chapter with that. I'm not even going to read anymore. The last chapter of this book, and it goes on and on and on, the future of toxin warfare, etc. Last chapter of this book, the conspiracy against black mothers. In the mid-1990s, media reviews were lauding the movie How Stella Got Her Groove Back, which was scripted from the book by author Terry McMillan. Black women need to celebrate their image in the cinema, and seeing Angela Bassett on the screen is such cause to celebrate. Yet I will continue to abide by my 5-year boycott of Hollywood films because of what I perceive to be a long-founded corruption of black culture by many filmmakers. And skipping forward, chapter is in subchapter Cultural and Psychological Origins of Fertility. That's what, in my opinion, the movie How Stella Got Her Groove Back. Stella got her groove back, but Stella, an older woman, takes a younger man away from a younger woman who probably would give him children. The man was Jamaican. He probably would have given him 3 or 5 children. And Stella was encouraged to take that young man away from that young woman just because she could. I think there was a lot of corruption behind that. But as a reproductive health researcher and aspiring demographer studying population patterns and how they shape society, I'm absolutely convinced that the people's future is linked to the status of its childbearing age women and men. Their health must be measured not only on the biological level, but also on the psychological and spiritual states. My 1997 book, Missing Assets, Cultural, Psychological, and Biological Origins of Infertility, I noted how fertility patterns were rapidly shifting for Afro-Americans. And it rapidly shifting. These shifting priorities are demonstrated in various manifestations among all groups in America. College-educated black women have the absolute lowest fertility level. A number of black women and men have risen high in the corporate structure. For men, this position potentially leads to stronger families for obvious reason. Because he has become a successful breadwinner, there is more likelihood that he can comfortably support a wife and several children. Yet for the woman in such a position, her maintenance of the privileged position is potentially undermined by redirecting her attention away from the needs of the corporation toward the demands of motherhood. I need somebody to sign in on this. I want you to tell me, is this true? Yes or no? For Africa One, I'm asking your opinion, you know, and I'm asking anyone on YouTube. You tell me, is this true? Social scientists have long known of this phenomenon. The higher a woman rises in the business structure, the lower her fertility. Recall the model of the Angela Bassett's character in How Stella Got Her Groove Back, that of an aggressive businesswoman. In the film, she is the divorced mother of a single child. Though the facts have been hard to come about, I believe that in real life, the beautiful 40-year-old Bassett is childless. As of this writing, 1998, this was true. Miss Bassett Vance gave birth to this was true. Miss Bassett Banks gave birth to 2 children in 2006 at age 48, and that could have been assisted. It is not my place to insult Miss Bassett for her life choices or her massive career successes. Yet I know for a fact that social scientists, indeed intending to deliberately orchestrate the decline of a group's fertility, have long held that such childless role models should be held up for other susceptible women of the target group to emulate. I then go to talk about the revival of eugenics, genocide, and race suicide. I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to close with this. Losing fertility by the numbers. This is what it looks like. And when I wrote the book in 1998, it has since degenerated even further. Between 1960 and 1980, African American fertility declined by 47%, nearly half. In 1960, African American women bore an average of 4.17 children per woman. If that fertility rate had remained unchanged for 3 subsequent generations, then it would have hypothetically have followed as such. 1960, one black matriarch gives birth to 4.17 children, half of which 2.09 are female. 1990, those women during their generation will complete their family size averaging 4.17 each, yielding 8.69 grandchildren of the single matriarch, half of whom are female. 2020, these 4.35 women bring forth 18.1 great-grandchildren, including 9.07 females. 2050, the 4th generation gives birth to 37.8 great-great-grandchildren to the original matriarch. But when the same exercise is carried out using the lowered fertility rate for 1980 of 2.22 average childbirths per black woman, we come to a radically different conclusion. 1980, a single matriarch gives birth to 2.22 children on average, half of which 1.11 are female. 2010, the 2nd generation, barely higher than a single female, then produces an average of 2.46 grandchildren to our original mother, 1.23 of which are female. 2040, the 3rd generation yields 2.74 great-grandchildren, 1.37 female. And 2070, the 4th generation at the lower fertility rate gives birth to 3.04 great-great-grandchildren. As this mathematical model illustrates, by lowering the fertility 47% in one generation, 4 generations later, 4 generations later, the outcome of that shift is a decline of childbirths of nearly 92%. Now maybe you can see how sociologists are envisioning America under a Hispanic-dominated culture. Hispanics are projected to become the largest minority early in the 21st century and a majority by the end. At the end of this chapter, I will share an updated addendum of this exercise. After 23 years, the declining of fertility has gotten much more dire. Black fertility matters. And I'll go ahead. I'm going to share that the updated one. Addendum, I put in. Black fertility matters. In 1960, black women in the U.S. birthed an average of 4.17 children each. Had this rate remained steady for 4 generations, it would have produced 4.717 children to our matriarch's first generation, half of which are female, 8.69 grandchildren in the second generation, 36.26 great-grandchildren in the third, and 151.9 great-great-grandchildren in the fourth generation. That's at 4.17, remaining consistent for 4 generations. Under this model, our 1960 matriarch would be expected to have over 150 great-great-grandchildren born in the 2020 generation. This change represents a 3,625% increase in family numbers over the 80 years from 1960 to 2040. In 1980, black women in the U.S. birthed an average of 2.22 children each. This represents a 47.3% decline from a mere 20 years earlier. Should this rate remain steady for 4 generations, it would produce 2.22 children to the matriarch's first generation, 2.44 grandchildren in the second generation, and you always do this strictly through the females, 5.37 great-grandchildren in the third, and 11.81 great-great-grandchildren in the fourth generation. Under this model, the 1980 matriarch will expect to have 11.81 great-great-grandchildren born in the 2040 generation. This change represents a 531% increase in family numbers over the 80 years from 1980 through the 2060 birth generation. In 2020, black women in the U.S. birthed an average of 1.77 children each. It takes 2.1 total fertility rate to achieve population stability. Should this rate remain steady for 4 generations, it would produce 1.77 children to the matriarch's first generation, 1.57 grandchildren in the second generation, 1.39 great-grandchildren in the third, and 1.2 grandchildren in the fourth generation. Under this model, the 2020 matriarch would be expected to have only 1.23 great-great-grandchildren born in the 20th generation. This represents a 31% decrease in the people numbers over the 80 years from 2020 to 2100. And also, that 1.23 great-great-grandchildren is compared to 151 great-great-grandchildren had we maintained our fertility of the year 1960. By lowering the total fertility rate of black women of the various generations within our mathematical model, we can determine that the outcome of the shift over the 60 years from 1960 to 2020 has resulted in a theoretical decline from over 150 great-great-grandchildren born in the fourth generation in this 1960 model, or they're not great-great-grandchildren, 150 children born in the fourth generation of the 1960 model, to a reversal in intergenerational births to a negative population growth rate. Demographics Demographics do matter. They matter a lot. They do matter. They do matter a lot. I want to thank you all for being tuned in today. You will notice I have been reading a little faster as the books are getting more complicated. The information, I do think, is really highly relevant. And I'm going to do the best I can to convince you that the information is very highly relevant, worthy of investing in it. Buy the books. I put up the link a little bit earlier, and you should be able to just click on that link. I want to thank you all for being a part of it. Flying Guillotine is in the house. He writes, Katie, great to see you in the house. Joshua K. Empower says, thank you for the information. And to each and every one of you who are in the house today, I want to thank you for tuning in. And lastly, For Africa One writes, Terry McMillan's feminism and corporate control of African women's minds and bodies equals fertility suicide. Race suicide. I do completely agree with you, beloved. So we have to overcome this mind deficit, which has produced this self-instigated decline in our great potential as a great people. You've been tuned into LIV Radio, LIV TV, and livinginblack.com. I want to thank you all for being in the house today. I am, because we are, and we are truly, truly a great people. You and I together, we're going to defeat our enemies' plots and their conspiracies against us, their high crimes against us, by using technology as liberation. And I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit in my new book. The new book is The Biology of, what's it called? Biocolonialism. And it's a very serious piece of research. It's going to be finished. Should be maybe by Friday. I'm going to send this off to the printer. That's pretty good, huh?